My name is Carol, and I'm 22. Fresh out of college, I have a story about my house. Well, technically my mother's house. It was hers until she passed away from intestinal cancer 4 years ago, leaving it to me. Mom was always a planner. Even before her diagnosis, she ensured everything was in order. The house was fully paid for, purchased before she even met my dad, which, thankfully, she had the foresight to do. She also made sure I knew about the will. "This way you'll always have a home," she'd told me, her voice unwavering despite her ordeal. Life wasn't always so complex. My parents' marriage lasted 10 years before Dad left us for another woman. I was 9 when he packed his bags. No drama, no custody battles, just his departure. His only concession was paying for my college education. He established a dedicated account and transferred the full amount immediately. I suppose that was his way of providing child support. Dad quickly started a new family with Linda, and their daughter was born soon after, 10 years my junior. I'd visit occasionally, staying at their rented house, but it never felt quite right. Linda would fuss over my half-sister, praising her accomplishments or fixing her hair. Dad was perpetually working, claiming he needed to provide for his family. Ironically, I no longer seemed to fit into that category. "Carol, would you like to join us for dinner?" Linda would ask, but her tone always implied she hoped I'd refuse. We maintained a cordial relationship, exchanging birthday cards, holiday greetings, and enduring the occasional strained family dinner. It was all very proper and polite, but in that uncomfortable, skin-crawling way. Mom earned a good living as a senior accountant, so when the cancer struck, she could dedicate herself entirely to treatment. I was 14 when we received the diagnosis. She left her job immediately to fight the disease. For 4 years, our lives revolved around hospital visits and treatment sessions. Mom never complained. Not once. She just kept fighting, kept planning, kept ensuring I'd be all right. But cancer doesn't respect plans. I was 18 when she died, just weeks before I was supposed to start college in another state. Grief overwhelmed me. I could barely function. That's when Dad surprised me by stepping up. He, Linda, and my half-sister moved in temporarily to help me cope. I was too numb to question it, too grateful for any support. "We'll help you through this," Dad said, putting his arm around me. Linda nodded sympathetically while my half-sister explored my newly inherited home. By the end of the summer, I faced a dilemma. College was approaching, and I didn't know what to do with Mom's house, now mine. Selling it was unthinkable, but leaving it vacant for 4 years seemed unwise. That's when Dad proposed a solution over breakfast. "Carol," he began, pushing his coffee mug aside, "I've been thinking. What if we stayed here? We cover all the expenses, maintain the property, and you wouldn't have to worry about anything while you're at school." I glanced at Linda, flipping pancakes at the stove. She turned, smiling. "It would be good for all of us," she added. "Sophie's already enrolled in the local school, and the house would be well cared for." It sounded logical. During the 2 months they'd stayed with me, things had been surprisingly smooth. Linda seemed less distant, and Sophie, my half-sister, had started treating me like an actual sister, not a distant relative. So I agreed. In retrospect, it appeared to be the ideal arrangement. I packed Mom's belongings, keeping some and storing the rest in the attic. I left for college feeling good about my decision. Over the next 4 years, I returned home for holidays and summer breaks. Those visits were genuinely pleasant. Linda would prepare elaborate welcome-home meals. "I made your favorite lasagna," she'd say, as if she'd always known my preferences. Sophie would pull me to her room, eager to share her latest artwork or school gossip. During Christmas breaks, we'd decorate the tree together. Dad would lift Sophie to place the star on top, while Linda and I playfully debated whether tinsel was tacky or classic. We'd gather, sipping hot chocolate, and sometimes I could almost forget this wasn't the family I grew up with. Summer visits were different. Longer, more relaxed. Sophie and I would spend afternoons at the community pool, and I'd help her with her summer reading. Linda would invite me to her book club meetings, and we'd actually enjoy dissecting whichever romance novel they'd selected. "Your sister's so good with Sophie," I overheard Linda tell Dad one evening. "It's nice having her home." It warmed me, like maybe we truly had become a real family. I called regularly during semesters, weekly chats with Dad about my classes, updates with Linda about house maintenance, "The roses you planted are blooming beautifully, Carol," and FaceTime sessions with Sophie, who kept me abreast of her middle school adventures. Everything appeared perfect. We'd forged this unconventional yet functional family dynamic, built upon the foundation of my mother's house. I never anticipated it could unravel so quickly. But I suppose that's the thing about houses, no matter how strong the foundation, can hold secrets. You never truly know what's happening behind the walls. Finally, at 22, degree in hand, and a job lined up back home, I was ready for my next chapter. I'd accepted a position at Marshall & Brooks Financial in my hometown. They'd interviewed me via Zoom and offered me the position immediately. Everything seemed perfect. Or so I thought. The taxi dropped me off in front of my house on a sunny June afternoon. I paused, taking in the familiar sight. Mom's rose bushes were blooming, although they looked different from how she'd tended them. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and new curtains adorned the windows. Small alterations that occurred during my college years. Wheeling my suitcases up the walkway, I reached for my keys, smiling, already picturing myself sleeping in my old room that night. But when I tried to unlock the door, something was wrong. The key wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking I was just travel-weary, but no, the key definitely didn't fit. "What the hell?" I muttered, attempting the key one last time before giving up and knocking loudly, figuring they might be inside watching TV. Linda opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. She wore an apron, dusted with flour, as if she'd been baking. "Carol, what are you doing here?" I wheeled my suitcase inside, noticing Dad and Sophie in the living room, both equally startled. Sophie was sprawled on the couch with her phone, while Dad sat in his favorite armchair, actually, Mom's old armchair, reading something on his tablet. "What do you mean?" "I live here," I said, observing what appeared to be subtle changes to the living room decor. "Why were the locks changed?" Dad shifted, touching his neck, a nervous habit he'd always had. "Oh, that. Yeah, I changed them last month for safety. You know, there were a few break-ins in the neighborhood. You could have told me," I said, trying to suppress my annoyance. "Or sent me a new key. I mean, this is my house." "We weren't expecting you," Linda said cautiously, arms crossed. She'd wiped the flour from her hands and looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Why not? I graduated last week. I told you guys I was coming home to start my new job." I looked between them, a growing unease settling in. Something felt wrong about their reactions. Sophie had even put down her phone and was watching the scene unfold with a strange expression. "Carol?" Dad interjected suddenly, standing up. "Can we talk in the office for a minute?" I followed him into Mom's old office. My office, technically. The room still displayed Mom's degrees on the wall and her collection of financial reference books on the shelves. He closed the door, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he turned to face me. "Listen, honey," he began, his voice low. "There's something you need to know." "Linda? Well, she thinks this house belongs to me." I stared at him, bewildered. "I told her it was my house," he continued, avoiding my gaze. "That I gave it to your mother, and you, out of kindness after the divorce. And that after your mom passed, it reverted back to me. She thinks she's just been living here because I allowed it." I must have stood there, gaping at Dad for a full minute before finding my voice. My first instinct was to confront Linda and tell her everything. Now I understood her surprised look when I arrived. In her mind, I was just some freeloader crashing their home. "I have to tell her the truth," I said, moving towards the door, but Dad caught my arm. "Please, Carol, he pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. Just give me a little time. I'll find us a new place to live. I promise. I just need to figure out how to tell her without destroying our marriage. Destroying your marriage? I hissed. What about what you're doing to me? He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, holding them out like a peace offering. These are for the new locks. Please, sweetheart, just a few weeks. That's all I'm asking. Let me handle this my way. I took the keys, feeling sick to my stomach. Fine, I said finally. But this is insane, Dad. You know that, right? He nodded, relief washing over his face. Thank you, honey. I'll make this right. I promise. But things immediately deteriorated. At dinner that night, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Linda kept shooting me looks across the table, all her previous warmth gone. The woman who used to bake my favorite cookies and invite me to book club now acted like I was a stranger. More potatoes, Dad? Sophie asked, oblivious to the tension. Would anyone mind if I redecorated the living room? Linda asked abruptly, avoiding eye contact with me. The current setup is a bit dated. I gripped my fork tighter, knowing she was referring to Mom's furniture arrangement. Dad coughed awkwardly and changed the subject. The next morning, I was making coffee when Linda cornered me in the kitchen. She was still in her robe, hair uncombed, but her eyes were sharp and focused. Carol, she said, leaning against the counter, I think we need to talk about your situation. My plans? Yes. When are you planning to look for your own place? She asked casually, as if inquiring about the weather. Now that you have a job lined up, you should start thinking about moving out. You're a grown woman after all. I took a slow sip of coffee, counting to 10 in my head. Actually, I've talked to Dad about staying here for now. He's fine with it. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment I thought she might argue. Instead, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me with my cooling coffee and a growing sense of dread. The next 2 weeks were like living in a hostile environment. Linda's attitude shifted from cold to outright passive-aggressive. She'd accidentally wash my clothes with colors that bled, claiming she forgot which laundry basket was mine. She'd cook family dinners but conveniently make just enough for 3 people, acting surprised when I came to the table. If I tried to watch TV in the living room, she'd suddenly need to vacuum right there. If I used the kitchen for breakfast, she'd barge in and reorganize the cabinets, muttering about how some people never learn to keep things tidy. She even moved my mother's favorite vase from the mantelpiece to a corner shelf, claiming it didn't match her new decorating vision. The worst part was watching Sophie follow her mother's lead. My half-sister, who just weeks ago had been sending me memes and calling for boy advice, now rolled her eyes whenever I entered a room. She started referring to me as that girl when talking to her friends on the phone, loud enough for me to hear. Despite the tension at home, my professional life was taking off. I visited Marshall and Brooks Financial, where they showed me my future workspace. A nice corner desk with a downtown view. My future colleagues seemed friendly and welcoming, especially Sarah from the risk assessment team, who offered to take me to lunch. When do you start? She asked over sandwiches. 2 weeks, I replied. Just enough time to settle in at home. That evening at dinner, I shared my start date, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. They showed me my office today. I start in 2 weeks. Linda's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down with exaggerated care. Well, isn't that wonderful? Once you get your first paycheck, you can start looking for your own apartment. I know of some nice complexes across town, very affordable for young professionals. I caught Dad's pleading look across the table. His eyes begged me to keep quiet, to maintain his lie just a little longer. I stabbed at my peas and said nothing. To escape the tension at home, I started reconnecting with old high school friends. Katie and Jessica were still in town, and we'd meet for coffee or shopping trips, falling back into our old rhythms as if no time had passed. But coming home was always uncomfortable. I'd walk in and hear hushed conversations from the kitchen or living room that would stop abruptly when I appeared. Dad and Linda would spring apart like guilty teenagers, Papers would be hastily shoved into drawers, and fake smiles plastered across their faces. Saturday morning, I woke to an unusually quiet house. No sound of Linda's weekend meal prep, no Sophie's music blasting, no Dad watching sports on TV. The silence felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. I padded downstairs in my pajamas, checking each room. The kitchen was spotless, not just clean, but unused since the night before. The living room was empty, the throw pillows perfectly arranged. Sophie's boots, usually cluttering the entryway, were gone. Even Dad's car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone. No messages, no notes about where everyone had gone. My first thought was that they'd gone out for breakfast, but something felt off. They never went out without leaving a note, even during these tense weeks. They'd maintained that basic courtesy. I tried calling Dad first, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Weird. I tried a few more times with the same result. The automated voice telling me the person I was trying to reach was unavailable. A knot formed in my stomach. Finally, I called Linda. She picked up on the fourth ring, just as I was about to hang up. "What do you want?" Her voice was sharp, hostile in a way I'd never heard. In the background, I could hear waves and what sounded like tropical music. "I just wanted to know where everyone is," I said, caught off guard by her tone. "I woke up and the house was empty." She laughed, an ugly, mean sound that made my stomach clench. "Oh, didn't we tell you? We're in the Maldives. First-class flights, luxury resort, the works. We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't want you tagging along and expecting us to pay for you too. Not that you'd know anything about paying for things yourself." "What?" I wouldn't. "Save it," she cut me off. "I'm sick of this whole situation. You're nothing but a lazy freeloader living in our house like you own the place. Your father might put up with it, but I'm done. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a grown woman living in our house, eating our food, using our—" My hands trembled so violently I could barely hold the phone. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, my mother's chair, actually, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. "Linda, No, you listen to me," she snarled. "Your father never loved you. You were just an obligation. He already wasted enough money on your college education, and now you're squatting in our house like some entitled princess. Well, I've had enough. Did you think you could just live here forever, mooching off us while we work hard to maintain this home?" I could hear Sophie giggling in the background and Dad's muffled voice saying something I couldn't decipher. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. "When we get back," she continued, her voice dripping with venom, "I want you gone. Do you understand me? Pack your things and get out of our house. If you're still there when we return, I'll throw you out myself. And trust me, I won't be gentle about it. I don't care where you go. Live on the street for all I care. You're not our problem anymore. And don't bother trying to call your father. He agrees with me. He's just too weak to tell you himself. We've already blocked your number. Have a nice life, Carol. Or don't." I really couldn't care less. The line went dead. I sat in the kitchen for what felt like hours, fury slowly replacing shock. They were living in my house, the house my mother worked for, the house she left to me. And they had the audacity to call me a freeloader, to try and throw me out. Well, I was done playing along with Dad's lies. I blocked their numbers, my hands still shaking, but now with anger, not hurt. Then I methodically went through the house, gathering their belongings. Linda's expensive clothes, Sophie's school supplies, Dad's golf clubs. Everything went into boxes and suitcases. I worked through Saturday, fueled by rage and bitter disappointment. By Sunday morning, I had their lives packed and stacked in the garage. I found a 24-hour locksmith who could come immediately. He worked quickly, replacing the locks on all the doors. It cost a small fortune, but it was worth every penny. When he finished, I handed him my credit card, a strange sense of satisfaction washing over me as I clutched the new keys. Monday morning, I started my new job at Marshall & Brooks. For 2 weeks, I immersed myself in work, learning the ropes, making new friends, trying not to think about the inevitable confrontation. I kept their belongings in the garage, but I rearranged the house back to how Mom had it, erasing every trace of Linda's decorating vision. Then came Friday. I pulled into the driveway after work to find them standing there. Dad looking nervous, Linda red-faced with fury, and Sophie scowling. They must have just returned from their vacation. Their suitcases were still in their rental car. Linda started screaming before I even got out of my car. "How dare you change our locks? How dare you lock us out of our own house?" I walked calmly past them to unlock the door. Linda followed, still yelling, "We're calling the police! This is breaking and entering! This is our house!" I turned to face them, something inside me finally snapping. "No, Linda, it's not your house. It never was. This house belongs to me. My mother bought it before she even met Dad. She left it to me in her will. The only reason you've been living here is because I allowed it. Temporarily." Linda laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. She looked at Dad. "Tell her she's lying. Tell her this is our house." Dad wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. He just shrugged, his shoulders slumping. "She's telling the truth. The house. It was always hers." I watched the truth sink in, Linda's face transforming from rage to calculation in seconds. Her entire demeanor shifted like a flipped switch. "Oh, Carol, sweetheart," she said, forcing a laugh. "You didn't think I was serious on the phone, did you? I was just joking. You know how I can get sometimes. All that sun and those tropical cocktails went to my head." "Stop it," I said quietly, but she kept going. "We're family, remember? All those nice times we had, the book club meetings, the holiday dinners. We can have that again." She took a step toward me, arms outstretched as if to hug me. Dad jumped in then, his voice thick with emotion. "Princess, I'm so sorry. I know I handled this all wrong, but I love you. You're my daughter. Please, can't we work this out?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The father who left when I was 9, who paid for my education but missed my life, who lied about my house, my inheritance, my mother's legacy. Work what out, Dad? The fact that you lied to your wife about owning my house? Or the fact that you stood by while she planned to throw me out of it? Linda turned back to me, forcing a smile. "Carol, let's be reasonable. We can all live here together. We'll pay rent." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. Your things are in the garage. Take them and leave." That's when Linda's mask cracked again. "You ungrateful little... After everything we've done for you, you'd throw your own family out on the street?" I felt oddly calm as I replied, "You just spent, what, $10,000 on a luxury vacation you deliberately hid from me? Pretty sure you can afford an apartment." "Carol, please." Dad tried again, reaching for my arm. "I know I messed up, but..." "No," I cut him off. "You didn't mess up. You lied. 4 years. You..." My father allowed his wife, Linda, to believe my mother's house was his. I watched her redecorate, rearrange, and systematically attempt to obliterate any memory of Mom. He remained silent as she made plans to effectively evict me. I was going to tell her the truth. He feebly defended himself after I'd left, after she'd transformed my home into hers. I shook my head. "I'm done. Pack your things and leave." I went inside and shut the door, tuning out Linda's shrieks of ingratitude and cruelty. Through the window, I observed them loading boxes from the garage into their rental car. Linda continued her tirade, her face crimson with rage. Sophie was weeping, and Dad just looked utterly defeated. It required 3 trips to remove all their belongings. As they loaded the final box, Dad made one last attempt, knocking on the door. I didn't answer. They finally drove away as the sun dipped below the horizon. The following day, Dad tried calling from a different number. "Carol, please," he pleaded. "We can fix this." "No, Dad," I replied. "We can't. Linda made it perfectly clear how you all truly feel about me. A freeloader, a burden, someone you never really loved. Perhaps those were her exact words, but his silence spoke volumes. That was 2 months ago. I'm still residing in Mom's house. My house. I've repainted the walls, planted new roses in the garden, reclaimed it as my own. Occasionally, I think about them, wondering where they've landed. But mostly, I think about Mom and how she ensured I would always have a place to call home, regardless of the circumstances. Dad still attempts to contact me, sometimes from various numbers. I no longer answer. Some bridges once burned are better left as ashes. The ironic thing is, I'm happier now. My career is progressing well. I've formed new friendships at work, and for the first time since Mom's passing, I feel a sense of peace in this house. Sometimes healing requires letting go of people, of falsehoods, of the idealized image of family you desperately wanted to believe in.